Well. Hello and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Abbreviated Artok, and welcome to another stream. But today is no regular stream. Oh no, not a regular stream indeed. Today's stream will be a bit special, a bit educational in nature, in fact, because I will be doing a presentation about my hometown of Bandung City. Now, Bandung City, you might not have heard of this city before, which is understandable because this city isn't really one of the biggest one in the world. It is pretty obscure outside of Indonesia but among Indonesians, Bandung is quite popular because it has a quite a long history as a tourist city, and well, even though it is a fairly young city, which I will explain the meaning of, it has a very illustrious history relative to other cities in Indonesia. So here we are. With a special presentation about this particular city. Now, you might ask, why do I choose Bandung City for this presentation, which is basically my first presentation, history presentation in this channel? Well, it's basically just because my thesis is actually about Bandung City, and so, well, I feel like it would be easy for me to create a presentation, a history presentation about Bandung City, because I already have a lot of the sources available to me. Now, I will list some of those primary and secondary sources that I did use to form this PowerPoint at the end of the stream. So if you want to, I don't know, you want to do some more readings regarding Bandung City as a whole, then feel free to find out where you can get those sources yourself. Though I warned you, most of the sources are in fact in Indonesian, with no available translation to English as far as I can tell. So unfortunately, you have to learn a bit of Indonesian if you want to get, if you want to understand those sources. So yeah, welcome to Artok's Weekend Southeast Asian History. I will do this kind of stream semi-regularly because I really don't have anything better to do in my free time. I mean, I have things better to do, and that is basically teaching children about history. But in my free time as well, I feel like it would be fun if if I compose or create some presentation, some history presentation for my channel here, simply because, well, I like history a lot, and I noticed not a lot of people in the internet cares a lot about Asian history, much less regarding Indonesian history, because most people that cite Asian history tend to gravitate to Japan, or maybe China, or maybe even India, or even Central Asia, which is basically Afghanistan and all those things. So meanwhile, Southeast Asia, for understandable reason, isn't too popular abroad, because not only there is a lack of sources accessible to the English world, historical records in Southeast Asia is kind of spotty and murky at best as well. So understandably, there's not a lot of interest for Southeast Asian history, particularly about Indonesia and its domestic history. So yeah, I don't blame people for that, but I see there is an opportunity in that for me to try and make some content revealing the history, the illustrious and long and interesting, depending on the people you ask, history of Bandung, of Asian City. And I chose to start this plan basically by making a presentation about my own city, Bandung City. So as I've said before, this is a this is a city with quite an illustrious history, So yeah, I will first talk about Bandung. Now, since I am big on attributing images and works to their original creators, I do have these citations all over the place because well, from my work as a teacher, as a history teacher, I can't simply use random images without attribution. Although I think that is quite obvious in the internet, I just want to point that out because some people doesn't really care about attribution and just steal willy-nilly. Now I do make steps to avoid that, so every images that I get from the internet will be attributed accordingly here, with sources if you want to see the original location where I got the image from, particularly in Wikipedia pages. I will point these out for cases where it is a relatively modern image and not a public domain image from over 100 years ago. So yeah, that I hope that will make people also go to those pages to see where I got these images from, and hopefully increases traffic and thus awareness regarding the history of Asia. So yeah, I think I've rambled long enough here. It's only been 11 minutes. Wow. So yeah, I think I've rambled too long. I believe we should just quickly enter the presentation, shall we? So first off, we need to start. What is Bandung? Now, obviously you people have already known, but by this point that Bandung is a city in Indonesia. But what city exactly is it? Why do I pick this city? Aside from it being my hometown, why do I pick it as the focus of today's presentation? Well, I have several reasons for that. So you see, first off, Bandung is the capital of the West Java province. Now, West Java is, I believe, right now the most populous province in Indonesia, since a lot of the population is concentrated in Western Java. This is partially because West Java is right beside Jakarta, and Jakarta is the capital. And a lot of people in Western Java actually only live in West Java, but they work in Jakarta. So every day they will commute. Every day they will commute toward Jakarta, and by night they will come back to wherever city they lived in. It is a very grueling journey. Most journey took about 2 to 3 hours, in some cases maybe 4 hours. But it is what people has to do here in order to live, because the capital is where all the money and the job is concentrated. You won't get a pretty good job in the rural parts of Western Java, because even though it is quite populated, a major part of Western Java is actually just rural areas where the cities aren't that big, and basically just large towns, since most of it is concentration in urban centers such as Bandung and even more Jakarta. And that brings us to the next point. Bandung is the largest city in West Java. Yes. It is the most populous, the largest, and the most metropolitan of all cities in West Java. Every other city in West Java quite pale compared to Bandung. This is because Bandung has been the center of many things. One of which is it is the cultural seat of the Sundanese people, displacing the old cultural seat. So the old cultural seat is Bogor, which is another city in West Java, which is relatively near to Jakarta. So this is a very rough map. If this is Jakarta, Bogor is somewhere over here. It is relatively close by to Jakarta. So it is Jakarta. This is Jakarta. Now Bandung is all the way over here. It is some 120 kilometers between Jakarta and Bandung. And Bandung is actually the bigger one compared to Bogor. Bogor has been displaced due to its lesser size and importance in the mind of the Sundanese, even though Bogor is actually the seat of the original capital of the Sundanese kingdom. It used to be named Pakuan Pajajaran. I will talk about this more in depth later. So the old name for Bogor is Pakuan Pajajara. Now there's no direct continuation between Pakuan and Bogor. So basically Bogor, the modern city as we know it now, is only built in what is expected to be the site of the old Pakuan. The old Pakuan was abandoned, I believe, around the fall of the Pajajaran kingdom, the Sunda kingdom, but this is a bit off topic and I will talk about it later in a bit more depth anyway. So now that we know that Bandung is in fact the largest city in Western Java, a cultural seat of the indigenous Sundanese people, of which I am a part of, I am also Sundanese, and is also the capital of the West Java province, it is also a popular holiday destination. Why is this a case? I will explain it later, but basically a lot of Indonesian tourists love to visit Bandung because of multiple factors that makes it very attractive as a holiday destination. Even though today its importance and its desirability kind of lessens because, well, let's be honest, the city is very overcrowded and there's a lot of problems with traffic all over the city, but it is still quite popular, even if not as illustrious as before. And finally, Bandung is a relatively young city. Relatively young because it is only established within the last 200 years. Oh, hi, Parrot Gamer, welcome. Welcome to the lecture. Well, I don't know if I can call this a lecture. This is basically just a presentation. Not a lecture because I am not a lecturer. I'm only a teacher. Now, yeah, so Bandung is a relative young city because it is founded in the last 200 years or so. To be precise, the modern Bandung city is built in 1815. No, actually, no, not 1815. It's slightly older at 1811. So this is when the modern city of Bandung was formed and constructed during the colonial age of Indonesia, where Indonesia as a nation state didn't exist and there was only colonial government of the Dutch East Indies. So yeah, it is a relatively young city, but even though it is a young city, its history is quite colorful, particularly in certain periods. Not so much in the modern period, but it is in certain period. What period is most interesting? I will show you now. So, the most interesting period here will be the colonial period of Bandung, of which it is the basis of my thesis. This is the basis of my thesis, the colonial age of Bandung, and this is where I will spend most of my time in, but I will also cover all other aspects of Bandung. So we will talk about prehistoric Bandung just a bit because it is important as a background to why Bandung is so important in the latter periods. We will talk about pre-colonial Bandung, where it changed hands multiple times throughout its history, well, written history, of which we don't really know a lot of because of a lack of written sources. And then we transition into the colonial era, the colonial period, where the bulk of history surrounding Bandung evolved here. So basically the colonial period is where Bandung first became a city, where it grew, where it became a tourist attraction, and basically this is the golden age of Bandung as far as historians can tell. And finally, I will talk briefly about post-colonial Bandung, which covers everything from after the Japanese occupation of Indonesia to modern history of Bandung, which I will only talk sparingly because, well, there's nothing really interesting there, since it really only concerns the lack of city planning management in Bandung City. So yeah, that's the timeline that we will be operating in. Now, I'm not too sure if we can cover all of this in a single stream because I do need to wake up early tomorrow, but I feel quite energetic today, so I decided to start doing this presentation today. But if I can't finish this in time, then I'll continue it on Sunday. At the very least, I do want to finish covering the first two periods in Indonesia, prehistoric and pre-colonial. Now, if you have any questions if you kind of question or are curious regarding other details of Bandung City in this presentation, you are quite welcome to ask it in chat. If you're not, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not going to force you to engage with me, but if you have any question, do ask, and I will try to answer that question to the best of my ability. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, let's just delve into our presentation, shall we? So the first one will be prehistoric Bandung. Now Bandung in prehistory is a fairly fascinating topic, basically. So much has been gleaned from the geological history of Bandung by geologists. Do you have flintlock-based weapons as muskets? Yes, actually, yes. So this is a bit off topic, but pre-colonial Indonesia actually has knowledges of gunpowder weapons, thanks to knowledges from, at first it was from China, the Southern Song Dynasty and the Ming Dynasty, and then once the Dutch and the Portuguese and the Spanish arrived here, the native kingdoms quickly took note of the more advanced models used by European powers, and they set up themselves to make their own domestic production line of musket-type weapons, muskets, arquebus, cannons, things like that. And there are actually a lot of examples of muskets and cannons from pre-colonial era in Indonesian museums. However, you will notice that they are actually quite a bit smaller than European cannons. You know that European cannons are quite big. They are probably about 2 to 3 meters long. Now, most Javanese Indonesian cannons are significantly smaller. They actually can be held by a single person, so they look more like a blunderbuss, if you ask me, but they are still too heavy for a single man to wield. So they are quite small, but they are quite potent, because many primary sources from Dutch and Portuguese adventurers in Indonesia do note of the skills of Javanese and Indonesian cannoneers, that they are quite deadly, quite accurate, and can snipe out a man. So even though their caliber is smaller, they are actually quite equal to European-made cannon. It's not until the 18th to 19th century that indigenous cannon designs are completely and utterly outclassed by European designs, because by then the Napoleonic War is brewing, the Seven Years' War just happened, and there were a lot of military advances in Europe that the Asian kingdoms missed, and thus the table completely turned during that time period. This time period is when a lot of the indigenous kingdom quickly fell by one another, because they no longer have the capacity to match the Dutch in pure firepower or manpower. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. Now back to prehistoric Bandung. Yeah, so prehistoric Bandung, we got a lot of data regarding the formation of what is currently known as the Bandung Basin during prehistoric times. My uncle is actually a geologist specializing in... Excuse me. My uncle is actually a geologist specializing in researching about prehistoric Bandung, and he actually gave me a lot of books about Bandung in prehistory, its geological history, its volcanic history. Yes, volcanic. Bandung is actually surrounded by a lot of volcanoes, and if you have an irrational fear of volcanoes, it is probably not the best place to live in, because you are quite literally living in an ancient crater. So yeah, my uncle is a geologist. He gave me a lot of books regarding Bandung, and so I have quite a lot of sources regarding prehistoric Bandung. But I will only talk about it sparingly, because geology is not my greatest suit, and I'll be honest, I would say your uncle rocks. Okay, yeah. Funny thing is, he actually has a lot of rock collection. Basically, rock formation, sediments, rare gems. He actually has a lot of those in his house, and he likes to show me those rocks every now and then. It's really funny. But yeah, that's it. So let's just get into this section of the presentation. So here's a very rough sketch of the formation of Bandung. So basically, Bandung was formerly an active stratovolcano. Now the name of this volcano is tentatively named, well, not tentatively, but it's basically named or nicknamed Mount Sunda. Now after the indigenous people, my people that eventually inhabit the area, so this volcano is called Mount Sunda. Mount Sunda. Now Mount Sunda experienced multiple violent explosions, somewhere between 210 to 105,000 years ago. Now these violent series of explosions basically destroyed the entire top of the mountain. It's basically crushed the entire top of the mountain, and so there's barely any traces of Mount Sunda today. And this eruption also created multiple other smaller volcanoes which currently surrounds Bandung city. And thus, after the last great eruption, the caldera of Mount Sunda collapsed somewhere in 120,000 years ago. The caldera collapsed like this, leaving a very massive crater and a dead volcano, basically, because the magma chamber is now completely exposed and pressure can no longer grow because a lot of the materials got ejected out of the mountains, and the mountain rim became volcanoes of their own. Now after a while, somewhere after this collapse and destruction of the caldera and the formation of the crater became filled with water, and the water somehow did not flow, and it became trapped, and eventually the crater became filled with water, and thus was formed Lake Bandung, which is a massive lake in the center of the now dead mountain. It's called Lake Bandung, and its area is quite vast. It basically encompasses the area of Bandung right now, which is about, let's see, I believe Bandung is somewhere around 60 kilometers from east to west, so it is a very wide lake. And this lake was still present when humans first arrived in this area, because we have some evidence of tools that were used as basically tools to help live in an area, in a shore area. So evidently humans here still have at least some kind of lake and live along its shores. Now unfortunately, somewhere within the Pleistocene era of 16,000 years ago, the lake dried out. I believe this was caused by a collapse somewhere in the western part of Bandung today, and the water dried out through that collapse, which leave a barren and empty crater, and thus it became a basin, and thus this is what we now know as Bandung Basin, a vast landscape of former crater. So technically the entire city of Bandung lived inside a dead volcano, which thankfully will not explode again. It has been confirmed. The more immediate problem is of course the active volcanoes surrounding Bandung, which can explode anytime. They have erupted somewhere within the past 200 years. They have erupted quite frequently, although they are rarely destructive enough that Bandung itself is threatened by destruction, but it's still not a very comfortable place to live in. So yeah, that is the formation of the modern Bandung Basin. Now here is a source. This is actually a book from my uncle's friend. I don't know if you can find an English version of this, but if you are interested in the prehistoric formation of Bandung, do check this out, because it is quite detailed, because it was made by an actual geologist. Now let's move on to the next slide, which is still about prehistoric Bandung, but this time we are talking about human habitations. So as I've said before, Bandung Basin is surrounded by many active volcanoes. There are remains of Mount Sunda. One of these remains are Mount Tangkuban Parahu in Sundanese. So like this. So it is written like this. Now, basically, this Tangkuban Parahu means a flip boat. A flip boat, because its silhouette when being seen from a distance actually look like a boat being flipped. So the rough shape is like this. So it looks like the underside of a boat, and you can, if you do this, it quite clearly looks like a boat being flipped. Now, the peculiar shape of this mountain actually inspired some very interesting tales regarding how the mountain came to be. So, even though the Sundanese people did not know any writing system until at least AD 500, there are actually a lot of oral stories passed down from grandmother to mother to children to grandchildren to great-grandchildren regarding the formation of Tangkuban Parahu. So basically, they are, what's the tale of Sangkuriang? That's what I'm talking about. It is the story of the creation of this mountain, and it is quite an interesting story. So the story is set many years ago. It is about someone named Sangkuriang. So long story short, Sangkuriang was born to a mother who married a dog. Don't ask how it happens. It just does. So his father is actually a dog. Now, Sangkuriang does not know this because his mother did not tell him that this dog was in fact his father. So Sangkuriang grew to hate this dog. Yeah, pretty much, doing a Loki. So Sangkuriang grew up hating this dog because he noticed his mother paid a lot of attention towards this dog, or Zeus, yeah. So towards this dog. And he did not know it was because that was literally her husband. So one day, Sangkuriang killed the dog, and he cooked the dog. First he sliced and diced the dog, cooked the dog, and then presented the resulting stew to his mother. Now, his mother asked, "Well, what did you make this soup from?" And he told his mother that it was in fact made out of the dog. Of course, the mother is absolutely pissed at this and basically banished, basically dumped Sangkuriang as a kid in parts unknown, left him behind because she is understandably quite angry at this. Now, aside the fact from eating that dog soup is that the mother actually grew to be eternally young for some reason. So as Sangkuriang grew, Sangkuriang somehow managed to survive as a young boy, and he grew into a very brave young adult. There's a lot of untold exploits done by Sangkuriang during his growth. His mother remained youthful, and when Sangkuriang came back to the place where his mother lived, he saw her for the first time in many years and thought, this couldn't be my mother, because my mother would have been old by now, very old. So he concluded that this woman in fact is unrelated to his mother, and thus he is quite intrigued by her beauty. I think you can see where this is going. Yeah, practice and get you as you got it. Like I said, don't ask about the small details, okay? But yeah, I think you can see where this story is going. So long story short, the mother is understandably quite squeaked out by this, and really doesn't want to, do the deed with his own son or her own son. But unfortunately, she did not have the heart to tell Sangkuriang about the true story about who she is. And even then, she thinks that Sangkuriang probably would not believe her if she said anything about this. So instead, she came up with a solution. She would accept his attempts at wooing her, and she will in fact marry him and become his wife, with a single caveat. He must be able to create a giant boat within a single night. He has to do that. If he can do that, then she will marry him. Now, obviously she thought that Sangkuyang will give up at this point because it is an impossible task. Unfortunately, what she didn't know is that Sangkuyang by this point only have about 99 demons under his command. It is a product of one of his adventures, which I do not remember. Yeah, so unfortunately Sangkuyang at this point has 99 demons and their armies under his command. So basically, during the night, he ordered these demons to build a boat for him, which considering they're demons, they actually can just build a giant boat in a single day. Now, at this point, the mother panicked that, oh shit, he's actually doing it. And she eventually resorted to trickery. Somehow she managed to trick the demons that the day is coming and that morning is rapidly approaching. If I recall, she did this by making the chickens crow far earlier than expected. So the demons all got spooked. Indonesian demons tend to avoid the day or sunlight because they are powerless under it, so all of them quickly scattered, and thus the boat is unfinished. Now Sangkuyang of course got surprised by this, and then he find out that he actually got tricked by the mother. But unfortunately at this point the demons already hit themselves, so he could not call upon them again. So in frustration, he kicked the boat and then it flipped backward. And thus, that is how the mountain came to be. No, I'm serious. That's how the story goes. So apparently, yes, that's how the story goes. Seriously, I'm very serious here. That's actually how the story ended. So he kicked the boat. The boat flipped, and it became the mountain. Yeah, that's it. That's the end of the story. That's it. So I guess you can learn a story here, and the story is basically do not kill the dog that is your father and do not try to fuck your own mother, or else you will be forced to create an entire mountain. I guess that's the message that can be learned from this very harrowing and very beautiful story, eh? Now don't shoot the messenger. This is just something that I got told about by my grandmother back in the day. So yeah. So yeah, don't shoot the messenger here, okay? But yeah, that is the tale of Sangkuriang. Now, regardless of how true it is, obviously it's not true. The Sundanese has been habitating this place, the Bandung Basin, for thousands of years by this point, at least from the late Pleistocene period, because we do know there are artifacts of humans in the area, and there are actually human remains discovered in archaeological sites in Bandung. So here we have some examples of them. Here is a human remain, a prehistoric human remain, one of the 7 found near Bandung in Pawan Cave. And here is the cave where it was found. So this is a very valuable archaeological site where not only we found human remains but also many prehistoric tools. It is quite interesting. I also included some a link here. So I don't know if you can copy paste from the screen, but basically these are the sources where I got the images from. Do check them out because they are quite interesting. Right. So that's prehistoric Bandung and how humans came to be in this area. It is part of a wider human dispersal in Asia during that time. So the prevalent theory is that human in Indonesia dispersed from mainland Asia some probably between 50,000 to 20,000 years ago, and then they spread to the islands of Indonesia, and some of them arrived in where Bandung is now. So yeah, that's it. Now let's move on to the next slide, which is about the Sundanese people in brief. So the Sundanese people quickly made themselves a home in Bandung Basin and the surrounding area. Basically, they became the dominant people in Western Java. Even today, Sundanese is still the majority in Western Java, and they are the second most common ethnicity in Indonesia, second only to the Javanese, which as legends told, is the eternal enemy of Sundanese. It is quite interesting. There's a whole story between why Sundanese and Javanese dislike or even hated each other, kind of like British and Scots, or British and Welsh, and British and Irish, but that is for another day. But yeah, the Sundanese people name many regions, mountains, and rivers around Bandung. So the naming convention for Sundanese places, rivers in particular, are basically this. So Chi is a shortening of Chai. Now Chai means water in Sundanese. So if you see this small table, the rivers surrounding or even going through Bandung are all named Chi and then something else. This is the so this is basically Chi, and then it got put as and then you add a characteristic or an item. So Chikapundung, Chitandui, Chiliwung. Chiliwung in particular, I know the meaning of. Chiliwung is basically meaning forest river. Forest river, because Liwung is basically an old name or an old word meaning forest. Liwung. So forest river. Now the rest I am unfortunately not familiar with, because these names are quite uncommon. They are very old. Even for modern Sundanese, they are quite old. It's kind of like how modern British is basically very different from Old English. This is basically the same thing. So many of these are actually very old names that I am not familiar with. Now the regions are actually easier to understand because these are basically just colors. So for example, the region of Chibodas is actually just white water. Chiburum is actually just red water. And Chichadas, actually, yeah, Chadas is basically a type of rock, basically a rock river. So it's actually a very simple naming convention, and you will see a lot of this around Bandung. And even in Bandung, you will see a lot of locations with Chi in it, a lot of streets, a lot of whatnot, basically stuff like that. And unfortunately, this is the end of the prehistoric Bandung section, because archaeological findings of Bandung is very scarce until today. Basically, between prehistoric Bandung and written history, there is a very minimal amount of archaeological findings. Why this is the case, I'm not too sure. Maybe it's because Bandung is in the tropics, and the tropics is quite notorious for being uncooperative when it comes to preservation. Now, you see that in Europe and in North America, prehistoric sites tend to be very easily preserved because temperate climates lend themselves quite well to preserving organic materials. Not so much in tropical regions. In tropical regions, prehistoric sites tend to be destroyed by trees, by the ground, by other organic creatures. Basically, it's just not a very friendly place for organic preservation. And since a lot of Neolithic, a lot of Stone Age, a lot of Stone Age items left by humans are in fact organic items, well, that basically results in not a lot of findings, to be honest. Although we do have found quite a lot of non-organic discoveries, such as axes, basically bone tools, and we actually have some megalithic sites in Indonesia. So basically we have dolmens, we have sarcophagus, we have even some rudimentary pyramid-like structures, although it is unconfirmed if it is in fact an actual archaeological site or is it actually just a natural feature. So this period remained quite a blank spot in Indonesian history. And history in Indonesia, as we know it, did not start until the 5th century. By this point, the Egyptians are long gone, the Romans are fighting for their lives in Europe, China has undergone multiple dynasties, all things like that. So our written history was very, very late, up until the 5th. It only started in the 5th century with the emergence of many, it's actually what we call prasasti. So prasasti basically means inscription. Let's see, prasasti equals inscription. Now these inscriptions are made using Sanskrit scripts. So there's actually the popular view is that history in Indonesia was kick-started by ancient Indians coming to Indonesia in search of trade partners and basically lend their scripts, the Palawa script, for use by the Javanese, by Sumatran, by Borneans. And this kickstart the history of Indonesia as it is. Now, unfortunately, Bandung is not included in here, so the history of Bandung remains clouded until a certain period. Now we are entering that period, which is pre-colonial Bandung. So this is another fairly short section before we get to the actual meat of this presentation, which is in colonial Bandung. So let's not tarry and continue. So we are entering pre-colonial Bandung. Now the earliest, oh excuse me, I'm just yawning. The earliest source that mentioned the region of Bandung, not the region, not the city. The city only came later. Is from a text from around the 15th century named. Actually, I forgot what the name of the script is, but it is a very old script, one that I do not have access to. I actually want to access the source, but unfortunately it is only reserved for actual researchers, while I'm not yet a serious researchers. I'm only a teacher, so I could not get access to it. So yeah, the first mention is in the 15th century. Bandung by then was called the region of Tatar Ukur, after its ruler, which is Prabu Pandan Ukur. Prabu is basically a word for a leader in Sundanese. Prabu. So it's basically an equivalent to king. And indeed, Pandan Ukur was in fact a king, ruled by a king of a small kingdom named Timbanganten. Now Timbanganten was the vassal of the larger Sundanese kingdom. Now Sundanese kingdom is of course the kingdom of the Sundanese, also known as Pajajaran, and its legacy is still felt even today among Sundanese who fondly remembers the time and legends of the Sundanese kingdom. Unfortunately, this kingdom fell at 1580. So Sunda was a like many kingdoms before the coming of the Dutch. The Sunda kingdom is actually a Hindu kingdom. Now after Islam, sorry about that. Now after Islam entered the Indonesian archipelago, Hindu kingdoms found themselves increasingly under pressure from newly established Islamic kingdoms, and thus the power of Sunda began to fail after the coming of Islam, and eventually Sunda was destroyed by an attack by three different, I believe it was at least three different Islamic kingdoms. Even after the ruler of Sunda tried to make alliances with the Portuguese, who by then already came to Indonesia since 1511, Pajajaran ultimately fell after a severe attack from the sultanates of Banten, Cirebon, and Demak, and thus fell the pride of the Sundanese, one that is still quite lamented even today. And thus Bandung became independent for a brief time before it fell under the dominion of a small and brief Islamic sultanate named the Sumedang Larang Kingdom. Sumedang Larang is a small kingdom based in Sumedang City. Sumedang City is actually only about 20 kilometers east of Bandung today, and today, and it is actually a very small kingdom that didn't survive for long, as I've said, but it has its own history, which I will mention a bit in the next slide. So the next slide is an intermezzo. Now, there's gonna be quite a few of these intermezzo slides. Basically, these are slides that is not directly about Bandung, but it is still related to Bandung's history as a whole. So I will talk about this. So Sumedang Larang is a kingdom in Sumedang City, as the name suggested. Now, it is founded by Prabu Gesan Ulun after the fall of Pajajaran. The founding was, I believe, around the 1600s. So there's actually a significant amount of time between the fall of Sunda and the rise of Sumedang Larang. Traditional Sumedang legends actually dictate that Sumedang Larang is the direct continuation of Sumedang, of Pajajaran, because it was said the first Sultan, the first leader of Sumedang Larang, which is this guy named Gesan Ulun, was actually the descendant of the last Hindu king of Pajajaran. So basically, this is descendant of the last king of Pajajaran. Now, legend dictates that while the king eventually accepted that Hinduism is dead in Pajajaran, that he goes to defend his capital one last time before finally dying in a blaze of glory, the crown prince instead he went to the east and founded his own kingdom. That kingdom is named Sumedang Larang. And even today, Sumedang Larang technically does still exist, if only as a ceremonial monarchy with no actual power. But the line of the king isn't broken, so it is still a continuous line from Gesan Ulun itself. Now here is the seal of Sumedang Larang. Here it is, the seal of Karaton Sumedang Larang. Karaton basically means palace. So this is the logo of the Palace of Sumedang Larang. And the heritage of Sumedang Larang is well preserved in Sumedang City itself, where they have a museum dedicated to the history of Sumedang Larang. Even though Sumedang Larang technically only exists shortly, about 30 years as an independent state before it fell under vassalage again, it is still a very cherished part of the history of Sumedang. Now, I'm actually a descendant, partly a descendant of the Sumedang Larang royalty. I actually came from a cadet branch on my grandmother's side. So yeah, technically I am at least a bit of a royal, because the royal title technically still exists, but it is a meaningless title, because not only am my family not interested in it, we actually actively disavowed calling ourselves part of this part of the kingdom, basically, simply because, well, let me just say, the people or my family member that does claim themselves still royalty or still nobility are basically jackasses, and we want to disassociate with them as hard as we possibly can. So yeah, basically this is a meaningless title. Besides the title of the nobility title, Raden. So basically the nobility title in Indonesia is called Raden. Can only be given to a male. Now, since my line came from a female member of the royalty, we actually have no rights to this. But that didn't stop some members of my extended family to insist that they are in fact Radens and thus be called nobility, which I hate a lot. My entire branch of the family disliked this practice, and thus we abandoned it altogether. Now, I don't know if this docks me. I hope not. I hope it doesn't dox me. But the family is so big that I don't think this matters a whole lot. So yeah, that's basically it about Sumedang Larang. So we have the coronation of Gesan Ulun himself here. made in 78 by Titi Salma. I believe this is also preserved in the Museum of Sumedang Larang in Sumedang City. Come visit in a while, you know, come visit Sumedang Larang in a while. We have a lot of nice stuff there. We have a lot of nice stuff. We have very well maintained museum. It is a very nice city, even higher than Bandung. So yeah, please come by for a holiday. If you're considering to have a holiday in Java, do please come to Sumedang because it is a very nice place altogether. So yeah, that is about Sumedang Larang, and that's it about the intermezzo as a whole. So we can continue on about Bandung. So like I said, Sumedang Larang only spent a short while being independent before it fell under the dominion of another sultan, another far larger sultanate. So Sumedang Larang became a vassal of the Mataram Sultanate under the third Sultan of Mataram, called Sultan Agung. Sultan Agung basically translates to Great Sultan, and he is great because he is the single greatest Sultan to have ever sat in the Mataram throne. He is a very ambitious person, and not only he conquered much of Central and East and West Java, he also made war upon the Dutch. Yes, he made war upon the Dutch twice actually. Twice he attacked Batavia, which is by then, Batavia is the old name for Jakarta. Batavia is the Dutch name basically. Batavia equals Jakarta. It is actually named after the ancient Batavians of Germanic tribe that used to live in the Netherlands. So yeah, Batavia equals Jakarta. Now, Sultan Agung sieged Batavia two times, and both times he was foiled because his preparation was what the fuck? Hold on. Shit, my pen. Okay. I wonder if... Okay, yeah, there we go. His preparation was actually quite lacking. But even then, his conquest did not stop, and until his death in the mid-1600s, Sultan Agung continues to conquer many areas around Java. So he's basically a conqueror sultan, one that even the Dutch feared because of the might of his army, the vastness of his kingdom, and his temperament. So Sultan Agung is notorious to be quite the cruel and ruthless leader who does not tolerate failure. And thus this will feed into the next few slides. So before we get on to the next part of the history of Bandung, here is a brief line of the rulers of Tatar Ukur under Mataram from 1620 to 1632. So first, the first ruler is Raden Arya Suradiwangsa. Again, notice the name Raden. So they got demoted from kings. Oh shit. So basically, the kings of Sumedang Larang got demoted to regions, and they got the nobility title of Raden. Raden Arya Suradiwangsa was the first ruler, followed by his brother Dipati Wangagade, and finally succeeded by Raden Dipati Ukur. Now, Dipati Ukur was the last ruler of Sumedang Larang Regency that was from the old Sumedang Larang lineage. Why? Well, the reason is because of this. So Mataram attacked Batavia twice. Both failed. And after the second attempt, Dipati Ukur rebelled against the power of Mataram because he was actually tasked with supporting the Mataram advances. Unfortunately, he was not quick enough, and the Mataram force besieging Batavia at the time suffered a crushing defeat, and there were reports of Mataram soldiers raping, looting, and razing his dominion around Bandung. So Dipati Ukur was angry hearing that, and he finally rebelled. Now, unfortunately, his rebellion was defeated in 1632, and at least according to Mataram history, traditional Mataram history, Dipati Ukur was executed. However, according to the Sundanese, he was not executed. Instead, he disappeared. Yes, according to the Sundanese, Dipati Ukur disappeared into the spirit realm, while the one executed by Mataram was someone else who simply looked like Dipati Ukur. Either way, whatever the case it is, Dipati Ukur was defeated and Sumedang Larang was basically dismantled, and Sultan Agung reorganized the territory by splitting off Bandung from Sumedang Regency. And under his rule, Bandung was made its own regency. Its own region. Before it was part of the Sumedang Larang Regency under Sumedang Regions, but now it was its own regency, founded in April the 20th, 1641. Or at least that is traditionally what the traditional thinking is. There is actually still a debate regarding this date being the correct one or not. There are at least two different variations of the date. There are at least two different variations of this date, and the year is also different. So we simply do not know which one is the correct. What is it again? Which is the correct time? But traditionally, it was thought as April 20th, 1641. In any case, the government of the modern Bandung city used this as the date for its founding celebration, and that basically caps off pre-colonial Bandung, because after this, Bandung will fall into the hands of the colonials, the Dutch, if you may. And let's see, how did it fall from Mataram, which is one of the mightiest, if not the mightiest sultanate to have ever existed in Java, to Dutch hands? Well, we'll see in a moment. So, after Sultan Agung died unexpectedly in 1645, Mataram was weakened considerably because his heir, Sultan Amangkurat I, was actually quite incompetent and weakened the realm, and that results in massive civil wars for the Javanese crown. Now, because Mataram weakened, the Dutch sensed an opportunity to weaken Mataram further by backing up Amangkurat I. And after they won, after the Dutch-Javanese alliance won against the rebellions against Amangkurat I, treaties were done by the Dutch to force the Sultan to give concessions in return for help, and one of those concessions are the surrendering of Bandung to colonial controls. And thus, in October 1677, Bandung officially became the territory of the Dutch East Indies. By now, the colonial ventures of the Dutch in Asia was under a certain VOC. Now, this is the shortening of a Dutch name. The name in English basically just means Dutch Indies Company. The Dutch East Indies Company. But in Dutch, bear with me here. In Dutch, it is actually named Verenigde Oost. Oh shit, that's not it. Oost-Indische Company. So this is VOC, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company. By this point, the VOC was actually nearing bankruptcy, and soon, actually no, this is still quite far from bankruptcy, which will only happen during the 18th century. But yeah, by this point, the Dutch was being ascendant against local sultanates and kingdoms, basically. And thus, Bandung Regency fell under Dutch colonial control. Well, the Dutch quickly made use of Bandung's surrounding area for... Are you closer to... Hell no, I'm still very far. I'm still very far. So since you know, since my what you need to do, I still need a, let's see, I still need a regular view. Oh yeah, the average of 3 viewers and 50 followers. Basically, I need both of those, and I can get affiliate. So yeah, that's basically it. That's basically what I need to do. But yeah, Dutch controls of Bandung was quickly followed by economical exploitation. So Bandung was quickly used as a place to plant commodities such as coffee, tea, spices, and other things. Well, the tea bag will keep helping. Thank you very much, Pirate Gamer. That is very appreciated. But yeah, as you know, during the colonial age, many Europeans took to the sea in order to get access to many important commodities such as spice, such as tea, coffee, because they are very valuable in Europe. And Asia is no exception. The Dutch came here to find tradable commodities, and they did found it, and they quickly seized this opportunity to build their own operations in producing their own commodities here to be exported. Now we need an intermezzo first, I feel, regarding the fall of Mataram. So like I said, after the death of Sultan Agung in 1645, Mataram rapidly weakened because the next Sultan, Amangkurat I, was cruel and even less competent than his father. And because of his cruelty, many rebellions were waged against his rule. And the rebellions were so big that Amangkurat was forced to evacuate his court more than once, and eventually he begged the Dutch for help, which the Dutch quickly take advantage by extracting many concessions from the Sultan in return for armed interventions. Now the rebellions were defeated, but unfortunately the damage was done. And Amangkurat basically permanently weakened the empire by giving out many parts, many lands, many concessions towards the Dutch and their traders. So yeah, that is a brief description of the fall of Mataram, which will only got worse as successive sultans continued to give the Dutch more and more concession in return for more help, until eventually Mataram was little more than a rum state controlled by the Dutch as its puppet ruler. So the Sultan does not have any actual powers other than what the Dutch gave them. So yeah, it is a very sad affair that is very common. During the day, the Dutch will use the tactic called divide et impera, divide and conquer. Divide et impera. Divide and conquer in order to weaken native states and extract their wealth. So when they're too weak to resist the Dutch army, the Dutch will quickly exploit them and force them to trade with the Dutch, so the Dutch can get important commodities for cheap. Yeah, that's basically the fall of Mataram. Now, you might ask, why do the Dutch use Bandung for planting commodities such as let's just say tea or coffee? Well, there are 3 main factors here. So basically the main factors are, Bandung has incredibly fertile land. It is quite high enough in elevation. Bandung sits at roughly 700 meters above the ground. So basically the air is cold enough and fresh enough that plantations like tea and coffee can thrive significantly. And finally, supporting climate conditions. So according to the climate classification by Junghun, Bandung sits in the ideal altitude where plantations can grow without failing, or basically it can grow. Oh, sorry. Basically the land is very, very fit for a plantation. Now, why is it incredibly fertile? Remember what I said about volcanoes? About Bandung being surrounded by volcanoes? Well, the ashes from those volcanoes eruption gave the land many fertile soils, because they ejected a lot of minerals, and those minerals will seep into the ground and creating topsoils, and these topsoils combined with the excellent climate makes Bandung region very desirable for colonial activities, and this results in a lot of colonial plantations appearing throughout the Bandung Highlands even from the 18th century. So yeah, Dutch exploitation by then was already quite severe, although not as severe as during the 19th century, which I will mention right now. So that was the history of Bandung in the 18th century, basically. A lot of kind based off where's the most shiny rocks. Yeah, more or less, kinda. I mean, I can understand why, because a lot of shiny rocks are quite rare. They're quite difficult to get, quite difficult to create, and because of that difficulty and that scarcity, they become the indicator of wealth, right? They become the indicator of wealth and thus the indicator of power. So that's why the one with the shiniest rocks wins, because they have the money and power to procure those shiny rocks which are difficult to get. But yeah, here are the beginning of the history of Bandung city itself in the 19th century. So in the 19th century, the Bandung region's capital was in Krapiak. Right now it is called Dayakolot. So Dayakolot in Sundanese basically just means old capital. So yeah, and you say, and people think Sundanese people aren't straightforward with their names. We're actually quite straightforward as a people. So yeah, the previous capital was Dayakolot right now. Yeah, but they only with the difficulty. Yeah, that's right. That's right. They are only as valuable as they are because we think they are valuable, and we think they are valuable because they are very difficult to obtain. Like gold is very rare. Diamonds are relatively common, right? It was only De Beers' successful campaign during the 20th century that made diamonds stupidly expensive. God, I hate De Beers. But yeah, there's Bandung. So currently Dayakolot is actually a very dinky town. Well, there's really nothing of note. There's not even a museum, and the region gets a lot of floods. So yeah, it is just a very sad land compared to the modern Bandung. So anyways, after this, in 1811, the Dutch governor general by then, Willem Daendels. Now by this point, the VOC have collapsed because of corruption. Unsurprisingly, a company that extracted more wealth than entire kingdoms at the time got so completely and utterly corrupt that its profit actually nosedived severely to the point that the Dutch government had to dismantle the company entirely and manage their colonies in the East Indies directly, and thus was born the true colonial administration of Indonesia, the Dutch government. So at this point, the Dutch colonial government was led by Willem Daendels, who ordered the region of Bandung at the time, which is Wiranatakusumah III, to move his capital in accordance to his grand plan at the time, his grand construction plan. Now the capital was moved to the current Bandung's location. Here we have a diagram basically of the old Bandung in 1825. Here's the source, Wajah Bandung Tempo Dulu by Kunto Haryanto. Published in 1984. So this is the old Bandung. As you can see, it is very, very simple, and it is actually intersected by multiple rivers. So this is actually the river Cikapundung, which I mentioned very early on in this presentation. There's also Ciguriang Manuk, which is another river. And then there's two more rivers here which I cannot read, but so there's a lot of rivers here, which is quite strategic because rivers then were often used as method of transportation because the roads were very, very bad. They go through jungles, dense jungles, which are unguarded and often full of bandits and wild animals. So people most often use rivers as transportation. Now the problem is rivers, well, they don't exactly go to the way you want them. You basically just go in the general direction and hope the river will take you there, or to take you closer to where closer than where you're used to be. So another purpose for Bandung is basically as a hub for transportation. Now if you see this straight road from the west to the east, that is actually the Great Anyar Panarukan Road made by William Daendels. Now I will talk about that in the next intermezzo right here. So intermezzo, here it is. Here he is, William Daendels. He is Governor General of the East Indies from 1808 to 1811. So he's only here for a very short amount of time, but his impact is quite big. He's also a French revolutionary. He fought during the war of the First Coalition. And he was actually, so why he came to the East Indies in the first place was because the puppet king of the Dutch during that time, Louis Napoleon, ordered him to fortify Java in case the British attacked Java, which by then the British already plotted Java and basically cut off the island from the rest of the Dutch colonies in Indonesia. So when he arrived in Java, Daendels quickly goes to work. He made the longest continuous road network in Java before the 20th century, which we now call the Great Post Road. The Great Post Road. Now this is great, and this is a very great road, and I do mean great. It ran continuously from the western end of Java to the eastern end, over 1,000 kilometers worth of road being made using 19th century technology and hard labor. They used hands, mind you. They did not have fancy technologies. And the most impressive of all, Daendels finished this road in a single year. Can you believe that? 1,000 kilometer stretch of road finished in 1 year. Now, unsurprisingly, the human cost is very high, and by that I mean thousands. So Daendels used forced labor. We have a term here called Rodi. So basically the name is Rodi, where people are being worked to the bone without any kinds of without getting any kind of pay. They did not get any extra food. They basically getting worked on as much as their body allowed until they just drop down and die from sheer exhaustion. That's how ruthless Daendels was. Now to his credit, it worked, but it was still a very dark spot in our history because of how many people died. Even until today, we still occasionally find mass graves of people who died during the construction of this road. The mass graves of workers who died of exhaustion, of disease, of cruelty by their taskmasters. We still found them from time to time. So yeah, Daendels has many legacies, both positive and negative. Positive because the Great Post Road is useful to interconnect the various cities of Java, but negative in that it basically ruined many regions and destroyed many families because of how many healthy male died working on it. And that is William Daendels, everybody, a very infamous figure in Indonesian history. Now, the intermezzo did not end here because surprisingly, Daendels also has a relation with the Sumedangese people, with Sumedang. So basically, this is another old tale from Sumedang. So the tale goes that during the construction of the Great Post Road, Daendels had the road go through the Sumedang Regency. Now the Sumedang Regency was built in a region where there are many solid rocks, and these rocks are, well, solid and difficult to go through. So Daendels ordered many dynamites to be brought to Sumedang so he can destroy and blow up these rocks. Now the region of Sumedang at the time, Kusumadinata IX, still a very removed ancestors of mine, opposed and objected to this plan, and he directly met with Daendels to discuss this, as you can see here. Now the legend goes, there's several different versions of this tale. So the most popular one, the one that I heard of, basically goes like this. The regent meet Daendels in a particular place in Sumedang, and the regent successfully intimidate Daendels into abandoning his plan to bring dynamites to Sumedang. Now, Daendels, even though he is cruel and very intimidating, he actually gained respect for the regent, and so he shook hands with the regent, which was immortalized in Sumedang and Sundanese myths. As you can see in this statue, it is so prevalent in Sumedang folk memory that a statue was built to commemorate this incident. Now, Kusumata Dinata IX was also given the rank of colonel by Daendels in recognition for his bravery. Now, because Sundanese people then did not know English or, well, Dutch all that well, colonel, let's see if I can. I stupidly tried to use my mouse. Colonel. So the word colonel became colonel, and so Kusumadinata IX was also known as the Cornell Regent. And even though it is blatantly incorrect, it is part of folk memory. So most people still remembers this guy as the Cornell Prince. But yeah, that is the tale of Daendels and Sumedang. Now, unfortunately, like many good story, it's probable that this story never happened, because when Kusumata the Ninth was regent, Daendels was already off Java, because he was recalled in 1811, while Kusumadinata IX, as I recall, had not yet taken position as regent during 1811. There's no way that both of these people actually meet at any point in time, or that maybe a variation of the tale did happen but with different actors. So it is possible that the Sundanese population of Sumedang would have confused a real event with a fictional event, and thus this legend of Daendels and Kusumadinata IX was born. Either way, we do not know for sure which one is correct and which one is not correct. Right, so that's the intermezzo between Daendels and Sumedang. Let's continue on to the colonial history of Bandung. So Bandung, as we saw before, was initially a very small town with a minimal population. Now, for a while, at least around 30 years, Bandung's growth was quite minimal, because it was a very sleepy town, and even though it was in the middle of a very busy road network, it didn't really translate automatically to very big growth, to growth in general. Now this changed in 1864 when Bandung became the capital of the Priangan Residency. So I should have mentioned this earlier, but the Dutch basically made a whole administrative region in West Java to govern all the different regions in each region of Java. So Bandung has its own regions. Cianjur has its own regions, and all these regions answer to a single resident. Is basically the equivalent of a governor. So a residency is basically a province. Now Bandung was part of the Priangan Residency, and in 1864 the center of the residency was moved from Cianjur, which was further south, to Bandung, partly because Bandung is nearer to Batavia, and near as well to the Great Post Road. So it is simply a better place altogether rather than Cianjur. And after this, Bandung began to grow quite significantly. So throughout 1870s to the 1900s, there were a lot of construction projects in Bandung. There were new schools for Dutch children, some of which are still present even today, like the prestigious third government high school in Bandung. It was actually a former Dutch school that became popular because it was seen as very prestigious, and even today it's, well, I don't really like that school because it is a very elitist school, as is the case for a lot of school here. So yeah, I don't really pay attention to them. But yeah, point is, Bandung began to grow significantly in the period between 1870 and 1900. This growth is further helped by the construction of Bandung Station in 1884. So by the 1880s, train lines are very common in Java. In fact, during its height, there are actually more train lines in colonial Java rather than in modern Java, if only because during the colonial era, the Dutch made railway lines to every single plantations in West Java. So there were actually a lot of train tracks that go to bumfuck nowhere, just so that it can pick up a lot of the commodities being grown surrounding around Bandung. So after 1884, Bandung's population grew very dramatically, from a population of about probably maxing at about 2,000 people. By the 1880s, Bandung has probably about 40,000 people. So it was a very, very massive growth in a relatively short amount of time. And by this point, the Dutch also realized that Bandung is actually kind of like Europe. Specifically, it's very similar in climate to the Alps due to its similar altitude. So many people begins to use Bandung as a vacation city, particularly people from Batavia, because Batavia is on the coast. It is extremely hot and extremely dirty. And so people often go to Bandung in order to distance themselves from the heat, from the dirt, and from work in Batavia. Now, as you can see here with these two photos, they have the Pranger Hotel and the Homan Hotel. Both are built in the 1880s, and basically they are being built in order to take advantage of this new phenomena doing back then in Bandung City. Now I have some more images. So here is an image of Bandung's train lines. Basically, this is a train line throughout West Java. As you can see, it is quite extensive with many minor lines going here and there, and a lot of stops here and there. Most of these lines are no longer existent. So basically, the only major line right now, I believe, is only from Jakarta to Bandung, but most of these are no longer exist, unfortunately, because the government prefer to use roads rather than railways. But yeah, this is, I believe, around the 1800s. the 1800s or around the early 1900s, maybe 1905 at the latest, because I did nab this from a document called Guides for Bandung, which was published in 1905. So as you can see, Bandung is connected with a lot of towns and cities alongside this route. So it is very interconnected with cities across Western Java and even into Central and Eastern Java, the connection of which would have been made in the 1920s and the 1930s. Now in the right side we have an image of Tangkuban Parahu's crater. So this is one of the craters in Tangkuban Parahu, which is the Upas crater, which is a favorite tourist destination even today. So even today, Tangkuban Parahu is very popular with tourists. A lot of people would climb the summit to see this crater, which is an active crater, by the way. Be careful down here. Now unfortunately, access there is quite limited because of the amount of people. Because of the amount of people that goes towards Tangkuban Parahu every day, it might be a bit difficult to access this destination even in the best of days. So if you want to go here for vacationing, then good luck, because you definitely will not have as good of a time as the Dutch when they began to use this as a holiday city. So yeah, good luck with that. Now, by the 20th century, in the 20th century, Bandung is well known as a tourist city, as evidenced with the fact that Guides for Bandung even exist. It is basically a brochure, a promotional book detailing what kind of sites, what kind of beauty, and what kind of facilities you can get while vacationing in Bandung. It basically has recommendations of hotels. It has recommendations of beautiful natural spots. It has recommendations of restaurants. It has a lot of things that is very much geared towards someone who wants to take a vacation in Bandung but has no idea where to go. So it is a very interesting piece of history that details the perspective of the Dutch regarding Bandung during that time. Oh my god. Oh my god, I'm actually very tired. Wow, who would have thought that lecturing for over an hour actually quite what is it again? Quite tiring. And this is an abbreviated history, mind you. I've always shortened this PowerPoint significantly. Because if I cram every single information in here, then I will not finish this presentation even until the 4-hour mark. It's going to be very long. I mean, I still have about half an hour at minimum for this presentation. So yeah, we're gonna be here for a long ride. Well, not that long. It's only 2 hours, so shorter than my regular gaming sessions, but still, this is a lot tiring than gaming, I tell you what. But yeah, by the 20th century, Bandung is well known as a tourist city. Its total population is about 47,000 live in the city proper, and in the Regency there were over 100,000, the majority of which were natives. And during this time period also, there were many famous businesses, so there were many factories, there were restaurants, hotels. Like I said, there were Hotel Homan and there were Hotel Grand Prienger. Both of them still exist today. They are basically 5-star hotels because they are very prestigious and very expensive. You know, if you want to vacation in Bandung, then go to Grand Prienger. They have the best rooms and the best services in town, in the city. And there were also a lot of brands that ceased to exist. Today they have ceased to exist a long time ago, but people still remember about them because they are just that memorable to the people of Bandung. Now, unfortunately, beneath this very illustrious advances, the natives of Bandung actually suffered. As you notice, most positive I've talked about here is only pertains to the Dutch. the natives barely gets to enjoy these privileges because a lot of the restaurants, a lot of places enforce segregation. So the society of Indonesia, of the Dutch Indies, is actually highly stratified, and it was divided by at least 3 levels. So up here we have the Dutch at the highest level. At the second level we have Asians. Basically this encompasses Arabs, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Malaysians, all of them basically go here. And then at the bottom, the very bottom, are the natives. So the natives have even less rights than other Asians, and they are very much considered slaves basically. Even though they're not called slaves, they're more like indentured servants. Yeah. And as you can see, we were oppressed in our own native land by the Dutch. Our resources were taken for exploitation, our people bled to die for their projects, and we were forced to suffer for the benefit of the Dutch. So you can understand why a lot of Indonesians dislike the Dutch, because even though we have been independent for over 70 years at this point, the scar still remains, and many people still have grandmothers and grandfathers who have stories where they were exploited, beaten, abused, or suffered at any level at the hand of the Dutch colonial administration. Now, relating to this suffering, squalor among native housing areas began to appear. So Bandung actually grew so rapidly and so uncontrollably. The government, the municipal government, the city government actually began to get overwhelmed. And well, since the government is naturally commanded by natives, and not commanded by Dutch personnel, they don't really give a shit about the natives. They don't really give a shit about natives, and so native living areas were often in squalor and neglected by the government because they don't really want a better condition for anyone that is outside the Dutch. Well, they still cater to the Chinese and the Arabs maybe, but not to the natives, the actual people who have been living here for a very long time. So besides from that, Bandung still grows, and this grow even spur some plans by the Dutch government to switch their capital from Batavia to Bandung City. Why? Well, because Bandung, not only is Bandung growing very massively, Dutch government personnel were already vacationing in Bandung anyway and have houses in Bandung. So the logic is, might as well move the capital to the holiday city. And Bandung is also more defensible because it is surrounded by mountains. So it's just reasonable all around. Plus, the environment is very cool other than the heat, the oppressive heat of Batavia. Now, this plan was set in motion around the time of the First World War, in which the Dutch were neutral. So in the Dutch East Indies, there were actually a plan to switch the capital from Batavia to Bandung, which started to get worked on around roughly 1918. And throughout the 1920s, the plan continued to be done, even though there were many problems during this time period regarding the expansion of Bandung to accommodate the switching of capitals towards Bandung. Not least that, well, the money. The Dutch government doesn't actually have enough money, so they borrowed a lot for this, which will have disastrous consequences when a certain kind of disaster hit in the 1930s. You might know what that is. So before we get to that, here are some slides regarding Bandung in the 20th century. So as you can see, here is Bandung's growth from 1906 to 1921. So it it started here. It is still recognizably the old Bandung. We still see some of the roads. And then in 1911, there was a massive expansion to the west, followed by another expansion to the northwest in 1916. Further expansions in the western side in 1921. And then even more expansions in 1926. And eventually a bit of a stagnation in 1931. You know what happened in 1931. So basically the white area is the total area of Bandung City, basically the city limits, and the black dot is habitations, basically living areas. Now, as you can see, living areas in the south is significantly denser than in the north. This is because the south is where most of the natives lives. So basically, natives were being rid of and they were forced to go being concentrated roughly here in the south. So the south is very much a very dirty region. My family, before I was born, actually lived in southern Bandung, and based from their testimony, the region of Bandung did not change much between 1921 and 1926 and 1973. Yeah, so they lived in abject squalor, basically. It's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate, isn't it, that while some of my cousins were living richly, they're using the title of Raden everywhere and think themselves as nobility. My family was actually kind of poor, quite poor. They were quite poor, they live in squalors, and yeah, overall very sad situation. Now, if we go to the next slide, we actually have an example of the typical native housing areas in Bandung during the 20th century. This is taken from a document called Bandung and the Hijin, which is a document made by the Bandung government in 1929 in relation to the plan to improve Bandung as a whole, as a preparation for it becoming the capital city of the Dutch Indies. So as you can see, it is a very, very dirty area. Very dirty. Most of the houses are made of bamboo instead of stone and rocks. And their roads are practically non-existent other than gravel roads. The people are still living very simply like this, and well, you can't even see a bathroom. So yeah, it's overall just a very, very pitiful, sad state for the natives during this time period. Now, thankfully, after World War I, there were some attempts to improve Bandung's conditions. So basically, thanks to pushback from certain native characters in the Bandung Municipality Council, there were quite a few improvements made regarding Bandung's living areas, although most of them only really touch the Dutch and Chinese population, while the natives didn't really get that much of an improvement. So even though there were small concessions for the native population, they were basically meaningless gestures that didn't bring much changes in the living condition of native people in Bandung during the 20th century. But I still appreciate that they managed to extract a concession at all, considering that the government were quite adamant they do not want to improve native conditions in Bandung. Hell, in fact, some Dutch characters even implied that living like this is actually the best they can do for natives and that they doesn't deserve anything better than this. So yeah, this is already a fairly good concession. What concessions, you ask, that they give to the native populations? Well, basically, basically they gave centralized stuff, small stuff basically, but they are very useful. Basically stuff like centralized landfills for trash, and at least access to clean water was improved by hydrants, which we will see an example of later. Access to water hydrants basically, and even brand new type of housings. So instead of the older wooden houses, so the natives were ultimately allowed to get access to better models of houses later on. So brand new. These are the most important concessions, however. Brand new housing models. Of course, the natives did not get the advantage. They did not get the full advantages of these new housing areas compared to the Dutch, but it's something, right? And from here on, we fall into our next intermezzo, which is natives in Bandung municipality. So basically, in the 20th century, Bandung City was governed by a mayor and a municipality council. Now, the municipality council is in charge of suggesting and debating regarding Bandung's budget and improvements that could be made for the city. And the council consisted of majorly European members, with Chinese and native representatives starting in 1918. Before this, there were native representatives in the council, but they were mostly figures of no notable qualities. They are basically puppets of the colonial representative. But after 1918, the native members that got into the municipality councils were more energetic, and they are more pushy in terms of demands to the government in order to have improvements for the natives be given from the government. Chief between this new wave of councilmen were figures named Darna Kusuma and a certain Dr. Gurungan Sol Samuel Jacob Ratulangi, aka Sam Ratulangi. Now, Sam Ratulangi is actually Sundanese. He is actually someone from East Indonesia, and he just came into Bandung in the 1920s after a string of incidents that caused him to drift towards Bandung. Now, Darna Kusuma is a much more obscure figure. Oh god. Sorry. I choked on my own drink. Can you believe that? Sorry about that. Okay, that's enough. So yeah, Darna Kusuma is actually a more obscure figure. Darna Kusuma is actually a much... Are you kidding me? Come on. Stop it. Alright, that's enough. So Darna Kusuma is a far more obscure figure. I can't even find out about where he came from, his personality, his age, and when he died. All of this are not recorded in history. By all accounts, he was super obscure. But his main role in the history of Bandung is to argue strenuously for more concessions for the council for native populations. And even though they proposed many sweeping changes in order to better the native population, most of the proposals were ultimately rejected by the mayor and most of the council. However, the mayor, who at this point was quite amenable to improving relations with the natives, agreed to the aforementioned changes in that the natives get get improved access to hydrants, they got centralized landfills, and got brand new housing models. So basically all of these were made possible thanks to the efforts of Darnakusuma and Samratulangi by presenting their case to the mayor, and thankfully the mayor obliged to at least some of them. So it all was not lost for these for the natives, even though the improvements were ultimately kind of superficial. Now, Darnakusuma, after his part in History of Bandung, dropped off from history. He completely disappeared. I don't know where he died. I don't know what happened to him, what he did after retiring from being a councilman. Meanwhile, Sam Ratulangi went on to become a national hero. So he became the first governor of a province in eastern Indonesia after the independence of Indonesia. And I believe he died, if I remember correctly, he only died somewhere in 1940, in the late 1940s or 1950. So he was there to witness the independence of Indonesia, and he became a hero, a national hero for his role in propagating Indonesian rule during the East by then, which is quite detached from Java, and thus the news came far slower than to say Sumatra. But Samratulangi helped to ensure that the new Indonesian government succeeded in establishing a foothold in Eastern Indonesia. So yeah, he is actually a national hero. And that's it about this intermezzo regarding natives in Bandung municipality. The next few slides are actually images, so just this slide. So yeah, this is some of the improvements that is made possible thanks to the efforts of Samratulangi and Darnakusuma. The roads were improved in this area, even though the houses are still like this, but at least the roads are made better. They actually have asphalt. It is actually made by asphalt. Plus there is a line here for overflowing water in case of rain. And there's also this is basically a native water facility. So this is basically a communal hydrant and a communal bathroom. So basically entire villages or housing areas have these spread out in certain locations, and they are used communally by the people. Of course, they don't always work, so they tend to have shortages for some years because the Dutch government neglected to activate enough to tap enough water sources to provide water to every single hydrants and houses in the city. But eventually the problem was solved, although not after some jeerings and critics from all subsets of the Dutch East Indian society regarding the lack of water in Bandung. Now, this type of facility managed to persist well into the 1980s, which should tell you something about the quality of construction after 1939, that these colonial era facilities remain in use in modern era because the people of Bandung had no alternatives. They don't have water directly running to their houses. No, they had to go out and collect water because they don't have direct lines. They had to do communal baths like this. So yeah, living here is actually kind of pitiful until recent times, and even in recent times it is actually still kind of pitiful. So not much has changed really. Right, so that is the construction, an example of the improvements made in Bandung thanks to the effort of the two native characters that I mentioned before. Now we enter the twilight era of colonial Bandung. So basically, the Great Depression hits. The Dutch Indies, like everywhere else in the globe, and thus the ambitious city expansion plans made by the city of Bandung was halted because there were no more budgets since the economy just collapsed. And what budgets that were available after 1930 was diverted to war preparation, because as you know, at this point storms were brewing all over Europe by the ascendancy of Adolf Hitler in Europe, and in Asia, Japan started its own colonial project, starting by invading China in the Second Sino-Japanese War. And this development also worries the Dutch in the Dutch East Indies, because they are fairly certain that with the wealth of resources in the Dutch Indies, Japan is certain to invade. And that fear is proven correct, because even as early as 1936, Japan already inserted many spies and sympathizers to the Dutch Indies. They were basically smuggled and infiltrated the Dutch Indian society. They posed as simple traders, as civilians and whatnot, and these people were there so that they can form or artificially engineer public opinion against the Dutch and in favor of the Japanese. Now, the Dutch government was not blind to these attempts, and many of these spies were eventually caught. But still, the Dutch government was quite worried and began to fortify the Dutch East Indies as best as they could, which was not much considering the lack of funds, the lack of indigenous industry for their weapons and whatnot. And thus, when the war erupted in 1939, the Dutch was still far from being prepared to fight in a world war. As you know, the Netherlands fell quite quickly in 1940. Basically, they got steamrolled horribly. Now, after the fall of the Netherlands, the Dutch East Indies was left alone for a while. They can only see Hitler continuing to expand in Europe, while resources was cut off from the Netherlands to the Dutch Indies. So they basically had to make do with whatever they have. And unfortunately, whatever they did have was not enough, because as we know, in December 7, 1941, Japanese Navy attacked Pearl Harbor, and at the same time attacked Malaya and began their drive into Singapore and into the Philippines. So the Dutch East Indies suddenly found itself at war with Japan, a war that they had anticipated for many years, but they could not do anything about due to a lack of resources. Now, the Dutch East Indies only stayed independent for a few short months until the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies and landed in multiple points in Java and in Java, in Sumatra, in Borneo, in Celebes, now Sulawesi. So the Japanese invaded many points and basically folded the Dutch East Indies defenders. Even though the Dutch East Indies by this point was reinforced by contingents from England, from Australia, and from America, they basically gave way due to the speed and the ferocity of the Japanese attack. And by early 1942, the Dutch East Indies already surrendered to the Japanese after brief fightings across Java under the command of Lieutenant General Hein ter Putten. Now, ter Putten isn't really popular today because he was the man that presided over the surrender of the Dutch Indies to Japan. Not that he had much choice in the matter, considering his position already collapsed. So by this point, by the time of the surrender, he already abandoned Batavia as an open city and retreated towards Bandung, where he hoped he could make a last stand in Bandung. But unfortunately, his defense perimeter got breached from the north and from the east, and his situation was untenable. So eventually he was indeed forced to stand down and surrender to the Japanese. And thus ends thus ends Dutch rule in the Dutch East Indies. From there on, I will stop calling the region Dutch East Indies and I will call it Indonesia. Now, before we get to post-colonial Indonesia, we have another intermezzo, which was Bandung under Japanese control. This is part of the larger Japanese rule in Indonesia. So, like other regions in Indonesia under Japan, it was ruled by members of the Japanese 16th Army because Java fell under their jurisdictions. Other regions of Indonesia fell under another army branch and the Navy, respectively. The Navy gained control of eastern Indonesia so that they may use the facilities in those regions to better combat the Americans, which by this point has already started to counterattack towards Papua New Guinea. Now, because it was a military government, the Japanese didn't really dismantle the Dutch civilian structure. So basically, they kept the government structure that the Dutch has made during the colonial era. And basically just replaced most of the names and then stuffed them with Japanese and native personnel. Because by this point, most Dutch was either interned or escaped to the Philippines. Not the Philippines, Australia. So with the lack of qualified personnel, the Japanese was forced to bring in many native members to serve as government members. Now, aside from that, the Japanese also made several new civilian structures and organizations in order to bolster the war effort and to prevent the Dutch Indies from falling so easily to the Allies in case of an Allied attack, the same way that the Dutch East Indies fell so easily when Japan invaded. Now, of course, this being my military government, the civilian life was closely watched. And this is partly why the Japanese made so many civilian structures and organizations down to the lowest level, because they want control. They want to watch people. They want to be able to know what the natives were doing. And even though Japan promoted their rule as being beneficial, because being fellow Asians, they will not be as harsh towards Indonesians as the Dutch. In reality, they are just as harsh, if not harsher, because in just 3 years, the Japanese managed to rival about a century worth of suffering under the Dutch by doing a lot of war crime. For example, basically the Dutch raped and massacred many villages and women to fulfill their own sexual needs, the comfort women. And there were also the forced labor. So basically, forced labor has returned, under the Japanese. This time it's named Romusha. And unfortunately, many people also died here because of abuse by the Japanese. So basically, not much different with what's happening in Manchuria in China, in the Philippines, in Malaya then. And this leaves another scar in Indonesian history, because even today, sometimes you still can find mass graves of victims of the Japanese occupation who died because of excessive workload given to them by their new Japanese overlords, which are just as cruel as their Dutch overlords. Very pitiful. It's honestly, we're lucky that the Japanese are only here for about 3 years, or it could have been so much worse. Yeah. So here is the government structure, the rough government structure during the Japanese era, the Japanese occupation era. So there's the residency, Kareshidenan, they rename it Shu, and then there's township, which is the level Bandung is in, is basically a city, Kota Praja named Shi, and then the regency is now below township, Kabupaten named Ken, not Hokuto no Ken, or the other Ken from Street Fighter, and there's also Kawadanan Gun, and then Kecamatan Son, Kelurahan Ku, and then the last is Tonarigumi. Now Tonarigumi right now has transformed into RT, which is basically the smallest government body, officially speaking, in Indonesia. Basically, this only encompasses several houses like this, and this structure in general is still retained even today. So yeah, still it's all still here. So Kelurahan Kecamatan, only that they remove Kawadanan. So basically this no longer exists, and from here it basically just immediately go up to here, and Kawadanan has been erased because Kawadanan is quite feudal in nature. So there's no place for this in modern Indonesia. Right, so now we come into the last part of the presentation, which is post-colonial Bandung. Yay! Wow, this is actually way shorter than I expected. I expected to be able to talk more than this. Honestly, my expectation was that I can get probably 3 hours out of this, but unfortunately I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm reading about something, but unfortunately it looks like I will not be able to reach 3 hours of this, but that's fine. I still get quite a good 2 hours of this. I will probably have to prepare my materials even better in the future, better than this, of course. But yeah, now we entered post-colonial Bandung. So, okay, hold on. So, immediately after, as we know, the Japanese surrendered to the Allies in 1945 after the dropping of atomic bombs in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the side effect of this, of the surrender of Japan, is that there was a lull in the government in Indonesia because the Indonesian realized that the Japanese has surrendered and basically has no more power over them, and so nationalist groups like Sukarno and Hatta, which are national heroes, decided that the time has come for Indonesia to proclaim its own independence, and thus in August 17, 1945, Indonesia proclaimed its independence despite Japanese attempts to suppress the proclamation. The news spread to every corner of Indonesia. It spread to Sumatra, it spread to Papua. Now some Ratulangi, as I said, played a part in spreading this, even though it takes several more months until the news definitely came to more remote islands. Bottom line is, the Japanese has lost any and all control in the Dutch East Indies by this point, especially in Bandung, where a wave of patriotism swept Bandung and many of its citizens began to openly rebel against the Japanese government and clamor for independence. Now, the local Japanese government tried to suppress these movements, but they failed because, well, they've basically been abandoned. They have basically been abandoned by the central Japanese government, and so they ultimately gave way and let things such as gun depot gets raided by nationalist freedom fighters, basically. And by September 1945, just a month after the proclamation of independence, Bandung is fully managed by the newly minted Indonesian government, the Indonesian national government. And from here on, everything will be fine. Except not. Guess who's back? It's the Dutch. Because the Allies generally, so some context to this is that the Allies generally avoided the Dutch Indies, or well, Indonesia during the campaign, because they thought that it would be best to just bypass the island chains and directly strike at Japan's home island, and then they can come into Indonesia and mop up any Japanese garrisons remaining, and perhaps let the Dutch return to their old colonial holdings. Now, what the Allies did not expect was the appearance of the Indonesian national government, which surprised them because they did not thought there was the possibility of an independence movement coming out of the background of the woodwork, coming out from underground and quickly taking over management of Indonesia after the Japanese surrendered. So immediately after the Allied forces landed in Java and other islands in Indonesia, there were many frictions between nationalist forces, Indonesian nationalist forces, and Allied forces, because understandably the former thought that the Allies are just here to restore the Dutch, and the Dutch clearly did not help matters by blatantly admitting that yes, they are here to reclaim the old order, the old pre-Japan order, which is something that almost no Indonesians want. So obviously, the truth, it is it is muddier than that, where a lot of Indonesians, mostly of the higher ranks, who felt comfortable with the Dutch, did try to help the Dutch into returning to Indonesia, but unfortunately they are kind of outnumbered by the amount of people who did want independence. Now this happened also in Bandung, where by November 1945, armed clashes between insurgent groups and Allied forces around Bandung increases in intensity and frequency, as you can see here in these images. There were quite a few Dutch armed patrols in and around Bandung, and these groups often clashed with the insurgents and freedom fighters belonging to the Indonesian national government, or sometimes just local marauding groups, because the situation was quite chaotic that time. Besides the Indonesian government and the Dutch, there were also many independent groups that are just going around rampaging all over, doing whatever they want. So, and many of these groups are often thought as part of the main fighting groups. They were often considered part of either the Dutch or the nationalist forces. So armed clashes are quite frequent and civilian death tolls are more common. Now at this point, Bandung was split into two sectors: the northern sectors and the southern sectors. The north was held by the Allies, while the south was held by the nationalist government. Probably not so coincidentally, this roughly corresponds to the Great Divide between civilian population in colonial Bandung, where the north is the domain of the Dutch, while the south is the domain of native population. Now, after a while, ultimately, the Allied forces forced an ultimatum towards nationalists. I'm kind of confused. Should I call it Republican or nationalist? Basically, the Indonesian government. Basically, the Allied forces gave an ultimatum: withdraw from southern Bandung and basically just surrender Bandung entirely, which the government obliged. Unfortunately, since the Indonesian government did not have the necessary firepower and manpower to face the Allied directly, not yet, this time anyway. But during the withdrawal, they did not so easily abandon Bandung, because Um, because Indonesian fighters then quickly torched the entirety of southern Bandung. Basically, they exploded many buildings, some of whom are ammunition depot, and then let the fire sweep across the city. Meanwhile, the vast majority of southern Bandung's population also withdrew from the city following the Indonesian fighters. So, yeah, this incident was immortalized as Bandung Lautan Api. So basically, let's see. So basically, this is the incident known as. Let's see. Bandung Lautan Api, which basically translates to Bandung the Sea of Fire. Let's see. Bandung's Sea of Fire. It is quite interesting, really, how the flame devoured much of the old neighborhood in southern Bandung. As you can see here, the devastation wasn't complete. There were still some intact houses, but vast part of South Bandung was devastated quite heavily by the fire. Now after this, Bandung was quite removed from the greatest struggle between the Indonesian government and the Dutch throughout 1946 to 1949. Because it was pretty solidly held by the Allies and then lastly by the Dutch, who ultimately retained control of Bandung until 1949, where the Dutch was finally forced to get out of Indonesia completely. And after this, Bandung, well, it really just underwent a period of recovery really after the devastation incurred to it by the Sea of Fire incident. Bandung recovered, but the recovery is kind of slow, and it only started in the 1950s, which is when the Indonesian government began to try and recover from the scars it experienced during the Revolutionary War. Now, Bandung history at this point isn't really remarkable, except for one historical occurrence here, which is the Asia-Africa Conference in 1955, where dozens of Asian and African nations gathered together here in a conference to affirm that they are indeed a third world country. So right now, third world countries used to mean basically very poor developing countries, but back then, third world countries basically means those worlds that did not take any sides during the Cold War. So if the first world is the US and the second world is the USSR and its allies, third world is basically everyone else, neutral worlds. Neutral worlds. So basically the conference aimed to affirm this neutrality between Asian and African nations. Now obviously that didn't pan out in the long run. Yeah, obviously that did not pan out for anyone in this conference. Not for Indonesia, not for a lot of nations basically. But kudos for effort. Now before we move on from the Asia-Africa Conference, there is also something called Dasasila Bandung, which is basically the Bandung Charter. It's basically 10 points, which affirms that the conference will respect the United Nations. It will not, the nations that signed this decree will not intervene in each other's affairs. It will try to maintain cordial affairs, and also it will not take any sides during the Cold War, basically. And it also recognize the Declaration of Human Rights. Now, and obviously, a lot of the points in this charter didn't really get carried out in the long run. So unfortunately, yeah, it's a bit of an empty gesture. Very sad, but oh well, it is what it is. That is called history and pragmatism. Yeah, idealism doesn't really get you anywhere. Now, we reached the very last part of this presentation. So, Bandung continued to dramatically grow in size throughout the modern period, and well, with the increase in size, so did it increase in dirtiness, squalor, and traffic. As you can see from these images, living in Bandung isn't the best now. From the glowing romantic images of the Dutch of Bandung during the colonial era to this, it's just very bad. It's just bad altogether. Now, unfortunately, it is still in part a symptom of the haphazard city planning during the colonial era. So basically, city planning for Bandung during the colonial era is already quite lacking because the Dutch government doesn't really show any interest in genuinely improving Bandung city for the natives, and then after the Dutch went away, the Indonesian government could not really make a coherent city plan, a coherent city plan, which resulted in a lot of wild growth, a lot of wild growth of shopping, street vendors, and houses. And basically, now Bandung is practically uncontrollable in its growth, and thus here we are being stuck with a metropolitan with inadequate infrastructure for everyone living in it. So yeah, it's very unfortunate. It is very unfortunate that my hometown, which used to be regarded very well by the colonial government, by the Dutch, became this. But it is what it is, and it is still my hometown, so I still loved it to death, no matter what. And that, my friends, my watchers, is the end of this presentation. Now we reach the very last slide. Here are the sources if you want to, if you want to learn further about Bandung, then I have these available. I believe some of them are locked though. I believe some of them are not accessible without a university or at least a research account, but some of them, like Bandung and the Hijin and with Weddings Plan North Bandung, are accessible from Delphi, and a lot of the image I used in this image are also from the online Dutch Royal Dutch Library catalog. So go visit there if you want to look a lot of very cool images about colonial Bandung and colonial Indonesia in general. Or you can ask me. So I have a lot of sources. So if you want any sources regarding colonial Bandung, just ask me and I will try to give them to you in PDF form. So yeah, that's basically it, and looks like there are no people asking any further questions about Bandung. So I guess that's gonna be the end of it. 2 hours 22 minutes, not bad really. I got what? Yeah, two and a half hours. That's not bad at all. Well, actually, this already starting to push my ability to talk because I had never actually talked this long in any presentation before. The longest one was about 1.5 hours, and that was in Indonesian. I've never talked that long in English before, so I'm basically using this as a practice, because I want to be able to talk further and more talk further in English, because I'm still very halting in English when it comes to presenting something, and I want to improve that. So this kind of stream is a way for me to improve that. So yeah, I will not put a set date for this because my free time is very volatile. But at the very least, I will probably make this at the minimum bi-weekly. So I will try to spend 2 weeks making a presentation. 2 weeks making a presentation so that I can do this every other week, right? So probably 2 times a month. Yeah, 2 times a month seems nice, and I will take different topics in Southeast Asian history, particularly in Indonesian history, to present. So it will not be the same. It will not follow a linear pattern. It will be random, basically random snippets of Indonesian history or Bandung history. I might cover Bandung again later. Because there's so many things to talk about Bandung. I just need to organize it, you know. I just need to organize the presentation, and then I can present this to you people. So yeah, that's my end goal here. This basically will be a fairly regular occurrence because I do like this. I do enjoy doing this. This is very fun, and even if there's no one watching this, at least I am spreading this knowledge into the world, and I hope it will be helpful to someone, wherever they are, whatever they are, and however they are doing. I hope this presentation will be useful for you. But yeah, I believe I should end this stream now. So thank you so much for watching. I am Artok. Next stream will be at Sunday. No promise though, because lately Sundays are very busy for me. I don't know if I can stream, but I will make the effort to stream. So yeah, that's basically it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next stream, everyone. Goodbye, peace out.